Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've ever felt just, completely overwhelmed trying to navigate a sprawling government program that promises these huge rewards, but mostly just delivers intense frustration, then this deep dive is for you.
It really is.
We've cracked open the files, the GAO reports, the court filings, and even the latest executive actions, all concerning the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, or PSLF.
And, PSLF started as this really powerful, almost elegant incentive. The goal was to funnel talent into these critical, often underpaid public roles, and we're talking teaching, nursing, military service.
Right.
But for more than a decade, it became the absolute poster child for systemic bureaucratic failure.
So our mission today is surgical. We are going to provide you with the essential framework for eligibility, show you exactly why the program denied, 99% of its first applicant.
It's an unbelievable number. And we'll also analyze how recent and, frankly, politically charged executive actions have changed the very definition of what public service even means going forward.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're really dealing with a government initiative that was designed to tackle two massive problems at the same time: the student debt crisis and the public service talent gap.
Exactly.
So let's set the historical stage. We hear a lot about PSLF now, but its origins are, they're often forgotten.
What's fascinating here, and I think a lot of people miss this, is that PSLF is not some recent concept tied to the debt relief discussions of the last few years. Not at all.
It goes back further.
Much further. It was established way back in 2007 under the College Cost Reduction and Access Act. And as a really crucial piece of historical context, that legislation was signed into law by President George W. Bush.
So this wasn't a contentious single-party initiative at its start?
Not in the slightest. It originated as a bipartisan effort to make sure that someone who chose to become, say, a teacher in a high-need area or a public defender wasn't forced out of that career path simply because of massive student loan payments.
So the original core goal was crystal clear. You commit to 10 years of public service, and in exchange, your remaining federal student debt gets canceled. Yep. It was meant to be a straightforward, decade-long transaction.
A simple trade-off, yes. And that simplicity is so key to understanding the sheer anger and confusion that followed. Because the formula itself is so elegant, you fulfill the requirements for 120 months, and you're done.
Let's just lay out that simple formula for anyone who is in or maybe considering public service. These are the three pillars of PSLF eligibility that you, as the listener, have to track constantly.
That's right. To achieve forgiveness, you needed to satisfy three non-negotiable requirements. And this is critical. They must be met concurrently.
Okay, what's number one?
First, you have to make 120 qualifying monthly payments, not 119, 120.
Second,
those payments have to be made under a qualifying repayment plan, which almost exclusively means one of the income-driven plans. We'll get into why that is.
And the third piece.
And third, you absolutely must be working full-time for a qualifying employer during that entire payment period. All three have to line up for all 120 months.
So the program began in 2007, which means the clock started ticking immediately. The earliest possible date for anyone to get forgiveness would have been October 1st, 2017.
Yes.
That date was supposed to be a celebration, right? A moment of triumph for that first cohort of public servants.
It was anything but.
Yeah.
It was a disaster. That first milestone quickly exposed the systemic rot that was right at the heart of the program's execution.
And we have data on this.
We do. The Department of Education's own data confirmed it. As of April 30th, 2020, that's 3 full years after the first eligibility date, the total number of borrowers who had actually achieved forgiveness stood at only 2,215.
2,215 people. Out of tens of thousands who had applied and tens of thousands more who had committed 10 years of their lives to public service, all based on this promise.
And that low number translates to a denial rate, that is.
Yes.
It's almost unbelievable, 98.5%.
It's just pausing on that, 98.5%.
You have to grasp the gravity of that number. We're talking about thousands of teachers, nurses, military personnel who structured an entire decade of their lives, maybe foregoing higher private sector salaries, around a promise that was then systematically broken.
And it wasn't because they didn't do the work.
No. It was because of technicalities, bad advice from servicers, and just sheer administrative incompetence. And that is the foundational tension we are diving into today. The promise was monumental, but the execution was, frankly, catastrophic.
That denial rate tells us immediately that the devil isn't just in the details. The devil is the details. So we need to transition now and really conduct a deep analysis of that fine print. Let's start with the eligibility criterion that trips up the most people, the qualifying employer.
This is the big one.
What is the single most crucial distinction here?
Okay, the core takeaway that has to override everything else is this. Qualification is based only on your employer's status, not your individual job responsibilities.
So it doesn't matter what you actually do all day.
Not one bit. You could be a neurosurgeon, or you could be an administrative assistant. If your employer qualifies, your employment counts toward those 120 payments. This is where people often confuse PSLF with other kinds of service-based loan repayment programs.
So if the job description doesn't matter, what types of organizations meet that qualification standard? Can you break it down for us?
Sure. The regulations define three main buckets. The first is the most obvious: government organizations or agencies at any level.
Federal, state, local?
All of it. Federal, state, or local. This is the simplest category. Your public school, your state health department, the U.S. military. If you get a paycheck from the government, you're almost certainly in.
Okay, what's the second bucket?
The second is 501c3 organizations. These are the charitable organizations as defined by the IRS, and they are a huge, critical part of this program.
And the requirements for that 501c status are pretty stringent, aren't they?
They are. These organizations have to operate for what are called exempt purposes. So, charitable, religious, educational, or scientific. The key phrase, often overlooked, is that they must not incur individual benefits or private gain.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, it's designed to exclude certain politically active groups or, organizations that primarily benefit a really small group of individuals, like a family foundation. It has to be for the public good, broadly speaking.
Beyond that strict 501c definition, you said there's a third bucket for nonprofits.
Yes. The third category is a bit of a catch-all, but it covers other nonprofit organizations that provide specific designated public services, even if they aren't strict 501c3s.
What kind of services?
The list includes things like emergency management, public safety, public health, public education, and public libraries. So it broadens the scope a little bit.
Okay, so just to give the listeners some really actionable examples. We know public schools and the military count. What about in the nonprofit sector? What should people be looking for?
Think about the breadth of services covered there. We're talking about most nonprofit private educational institutions, so everything from major universities to small liberal arts colleges, they almost always qualify.
What about healthcare?
Absolutely. Nonprofit hospitals, homeless shelters, community health clinics, food banks, legal aid societies, these are almost universally covered, but the key is they have to maintain that required 501c3 status. This means the benefit extends way, way beyond just state and federal employees.
This is where it gets tricky, though. This specific area, the nuance between direct employment and contract work, has proven to be one of the most persistent failure points for borrowers. It's crucial for anyone working in what you might call a quasi-public setting.
This is where thousands, and I mean thousands, of public servants lost their eligibility. The rule is simple but brutal. You must be directly employed by the qualifying entity.
Not just working for them.
No. If you are a government contractor, you generally do not qualify based on your contract with the government alone. Your employer is the private company that holds the contract.
Can you walk us through a common scenario where this rule has burned people?
Of course. Think of a state university system, which is a clear qualifying employer. Now, if that university hires a private company to manage its entire IT infrastructure or its security forces, the person working those jobs is in a tough spot.
Even though they're on campus every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though they're physically on campus wearing a uniform that might say university security, they're actually employed by the private contracting firm. And unless that private firm itself is also a 501c3 entity, which is rare, that employment does not count.
So it's about who signs the paycheck.
It's all about who signs the paycheck. The payment source matters, not the location or the nature of the work. It's a crucial distinction.
And we see this play out very clearly in highly specialized government contracts, like at the national laboratories.
Absolutely. Many Department of Energy or National Nuclear Security Administration labs are actually managed by massive private universities or corporations. The scientists and engineers working there are often providing essential, mission-critical public service.
But their paychecks come from the private manager.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So if they are employed by the managing entity, say a huge private university, that university has to independently qualify as a 501c3 for the employment to count. But if the lab is managed by a private, for-profit aerospace or energy company, the employees are immediately disqualified.
Despite serving a core government function.
That's right. And that feels like a technical barrier that really goes against the spirit of the law, which was to reward commitment to the public good.
It does, but legally, that barrier is ironclad under the current statute.
Wow.
And it leads us to the critical administrative requirement, the need for the employment certification form.
Yes. You cannot afford to wait 10 years and just hope you qualified.
Why is this certification form so vital?
It is your insurance policy. This form is what you submit to the Department of Education's contractor, which is currently Mohala, and they use it to determine if your employer and your employment qualify.
And you shouldn't just do this once.
Never. We strongly urge every listener, particularly those who are new to PSLF, to submit this form annually and every single time you change jobs.
Why that often?
Because if the servicer rejects your employer, you want to find out on day 36, not on day 3600. Without that regular certification, you have no recourse if, 10 years down the line, a record is disputed or a definition changes. It's your paper trail.
That covers the qualifying employer. Now let's shift our focus to the what loan types actually qualify under PSLF? Because, again, it turns out not all federal loans are treated equally.
And this is the second great hurdle that caused that 98.5% denial rate. The eligibility requirement is incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
Only loans made under the William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program are automatically eligible.
So what does that include?
That includes your subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans, PLS loans, whether they're for parents or for grad students, and importantly, federal direct consolidation loans.
Now, I know many of our listeners, especially those who took out loans before, say, 2010, still hold older forms of federal debt. I'm thinking of the FFEL program, Federal Family Education Loan, or Federal Perkins loans. What's the pathway for them?
The only pathway to eligibility for FFEL or Perkins loans is consolidation. They must be consolidated into a direct consolidation loan.
Let me just repeat that. It's not an option.
It is non-optional and non-negotiable. If a borrower makes 10 years of payments on an FFEL loan without first consolidating, those 120 payments are immediately and irrevocably disqualified, wiped out.
And based on the litigation we've reviewed, this was a major point of confusion. Loan servicers were actively misleading borrowers about this consolidation requirement.
They absolutely were. They were telling them that their FFEL loans were federal and therefore fine.
Which is technically true. They are federal loans.
It is, but they glossed over the distinction between general federal status and specific direct loan status. And that single piece of misinformation disqualified thousands of people who were doing public service on the assumption their loans were compliant.
And we must also reiterate the obvious here. What about private loans?
Private student loans, those issued by banks or private entities like Sallie Mae, are entirely ineligible. There's no ambiguity. They cannot be discharged under PSLF, and they cannot be consolidated into the direct loan program, full stop.
So we've established the qualifying employer and the qualifying loan type. Now for the 120 payments themselves, we know they must be monthly and on time. But, critically, they also have to be made under a specific family of repayment plans. Why are these plans mandatory?
This is the technical distinction that really defines the cost and the utility of the entire program. The 120 payments must be made under one of the income-driven repayment or IDR plans.
So that's income contingent repayment.
Yes, ICR, income-based repayment, or IBR, pay-as-you-earn, which is pay-as-you-eat, or the revised pay-as-you-earn repay. It has to be one of those.
Why can't a borrower just choose the standard 10-year repayment plan? It seems simpler.
Because the standard 10-year repayment plan, by its very design, ensures that your debt is completely zeroed out after exactly 120 payments.
So there's nothing left to forgive.
Exactly. The PSLF program is designed to forgive the remaining balance after you've made 120 qualifying payments. If your balance is zero because you successfully completed the standard 10-year plan, there's nothing left to forgive.
So the whole point of the IDR plans is to lower the payment.
Yes, they intentionally lower your required monthly payment, pegging it to a percentage of your discretionary income, which ensures that even after 120 payments, a substantial, often enormous balance remains to be forgiven.
This means if you start public service and just stick to the standard 10-year plan, thinking you'll get forgiveness at the end, you are completely missing the entire mechanical point of the program.
You are. You're just paying off your loan. You have to choose an IDR plan to maximize the forgiveness benefit. Moreover, payments made under things like extended or graduated repayment plans, which stretch payments out but aren't tied to your income, usually don't count either. That was another huge trap for early borrowers.
There is one last tantalizing detail about the forgiveness itself. Unlike some other federal programs, PSLF currently has no cap on the amount forgiven.
That is a critical incentive, especially for highly educated, high-debt professionals. If a medical school graduate commits to working for a nonprofit hospital in a rural area and they have, say, $400,000 in debt,
That entire remaining balance could just vanish.
theoretically, yes. The entire remaining balance can be wiped out after 10 years of service. It's a massive financial benefit.
Are there any tax implications?
We should note that while the federal government does not tax PSLF forgiveness as income, there are some state-level exceptions. Mississippi is explicitly mentioned in our source material as a state that does tax PSLF forgiveness, which is a key detail for anyone living and working there.
We have spent a good amount of time defining the rules. And in doing so, I think we've already uncovered exactly where the failure points lie. The confusion over loan types and people being on the wrong repayment plans.
That's the core of it.
Let's now move into the period of crisis. Because the sheer scale of those initial denial rates, it demanded congressional action.
Oh, it had to. The initial data was truly staggering. When that first cohort of public servants began applying for forgiveness, starting in October 2017, the numbers that came back suggested the system had completely broken down.
And what were those first numbers?
Of the first 28,000 public servants who applied, only 96 were approved.
96.
96. That's a 99% denial rate right out of the gate.
That is a level of administrative failure that goes way beyond a small oversight. We have to ask, was this just because borrowers made mistakes, or was the system itself fundamentally compromised?
The evidence strongly suggests systemic compromise rooted in misinformation. While the rules were complex, the primary root cause identified by multiple government watchdogs and later in court was that the loan servicers, the companies managing the accounts, like the predecessor to Mohilla, were providing false or misleading information to borrowers.
So people were being told they were on the right track when they weren't.
Constantly. Servicers frequently told borrowers that they were on a qualifying repayment plan or that their older FFEL loans were fine, without ever mentioning the mandatory step of consolidation into a direct loan.
So we have thousands of people who were told, you're all set, just keep working, only to find out a decade later that none of their payments counted.
Exactly. This left Congress with very little choice but to intervene.
What was their first attempt at a legislative fix?
The first major response came in March 2018. Congress passed the Temporary Expanded Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, or TEP-PSLF.
Another acronym.
Another one. This program was essentially a targeted patch. It was designed specifically to catch those public servants who had satisfied the employment requirement and made 120 payments, but were denied only because they had chosen a non-qualifying repayment plan, like a graduated or extended plan, instead of an IDR plan.
Okay, that sounds like it should have solved a pretty large chunk of the problem. Did it work?
Tragically, no. The fix itself failed, and failed massively, which just illustrates the deeper rot in the tracking system.
What do the numbers say?
A Government Accountability Office, or GAO report, documented the failure of 54,184 public servants who applied for this TEP-PSLF fix. 53,523 were denied.
So the fix had the same denial rate as the original problem.
Pretty much. The mechanism of failure was subtle. Even though TEP-PSLF forgave the repayment plan error, it still had to rely on the same flawed servicer accounting that couldn't accurately track payments or determine compliance in the first place, so it just led to another colossal wave of denials.
If I'm a public servant who has now been through a PSLF denial and then a TEP-PSLF denial, I'm left with the distinct feeling that the government made a promise it had no intention of keeping. Was there any financial relief offered at that point?
Well, recognizing they were dealing with a massive failure caused by government administrators and contractors, the U.S. Department of Education announced a second chance plan in May 2018.
A fix for the fix.
Essentially, yes. Congress had set aside $350 million specifically for this purpose, a kind of fix-it fund, to help people seeking reconsideration who were denied because of the wrong repayment plan.
And how was that money distributed?
It was distributed on a first-come, first-served basis, and while $350 million sounds like a lot of money, given the scale of the debt and the sheer number of denials, it offered only very limited relief, and it ran out quickly. It was a temporary solution, not a systemic correction.
Now, even as those legislative patches were being applied, The day-to-day realities of just dealing with the loan servicers continued to plague applicants. What specific ongoing issues are borrowers facing, even now, primarily with the current contractor, Mohele?
The list is long and it's persistent. We see incredibly long processing delays. Applicants report waiting 3 months or more after submitting certification forms, which is just unacceptable when the benefit hinges on precise timing.
And it's not just delays.
Not at all. Worse, there are repeated documented instances where servicers incorrectly inform people they do not qualify when they actually do. Automated messages containing wildly inaccurate payment counts are routine.
So the system can't even count correctly?
Apparently not. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, even issued formal warnings to the previous servicer, FedLoan, over these deceptive practices, which essentially confirmed the institutional failure.
And even the tool that's designed to help seems to have its own technical glitches.
Yes, the Department of Education's own PSLF help tool has been reported to have these technical limitations. For instance, it sometimes won't allow people to select that they have successfully made over 120 payments, which is the entire reason they're using the tool, forcing them to find awkward workarounds or submit forms with incomplete information.
This is an ironic bureaucratic track.
It's the perfect definition of one. And this whole context of systemic failure, servicer misinformation, and technical roadblocks is what makes the Biden administration's corrective action in 2021 such a watershed moment. This was the temporary waiver. This was the true game changer that finally addressed the root causes of all these denials.
What did it do differently?
The temporary waiver, which was announced on October 6, 2021, was truly revolutionary because it cut right through the two primary errors that had been disqualifying borrowers for years.
The loan type and the payment plan.
Exactly. The waiver essentially allowed past payments to qualify even if the borrower had the wrong loan type, meaning payments on old FFEL loans now counted, and even if the borrower was on the wrong non-IDR repayment plan.
So it was an immediate acknowledgement that the system, not the borrower, was at fault.
Precisely. It forced the Department of Education to look back at the past decade, strip away all the servicer errors, and accurately credit those 120 payments for public servants who had held up their end of the bargain. This wasn't a small adjustment. It required a complete overhaul of their payment accounting systems.
And the impact speaks for itself. What did that single temporary policy change actually achieve?
It was massive. As of March 2022, so just 5 months after the waiver was announced, 100,000 people had their loans canceled.
Wow.
Amounting to over $6.2 billion in student loan forgiveness. This success rate didn't just validate the complaints of all those denied borrowers, it reset the foundation of the program. It demonstrated its genuine, if previously untapped, potential.
That is a staggering number. $6.2 billion canceled for 100,000 public servants in a matter of months. However, that figure also gives us pause. The government estimates that something like 1.3 million public servants qualify for PSLF.
That's the estimate, yes.
So while $6.2 billion is immense, does that still feel like just a drop in the bucket compared to the total population that's eligible?
It highlights the persistent gap. It shows the incredible power of the waiver, for sure, but it also confirms that even after this huge success, there are still hundreds of thousands, if not a million, public servants who either don't know they qualify, haven't completed the necessary steps, or are still just navigating the bureaucracy. The complexity remains incredibly high, and the sheer volume of debt still eligible for cancellation is a massive concern for fiscal planners.
That gap, the promise versus the potential cost, brings us perfectly to our next section. Because what's fascinating here is that even as the government tries to fix the systemic flaws in PSLF, the program itself has been under constant attack from a policy perspective.
Yes.
It has been politically targeted almost since its inception, and that's regardless of which party was in power.
The political volatility of PSLF stems directly from those cost estimates you just mentioned. Once the scale of potential forgiveness became clear, especially for professionals with high debt loads, proposals to curb the program became very frequent.
And it's important to stress one thing about these proposals.
Yes. Nearly all of them targeted new borrowers only. They acknowledged that it is nearly impossible, both politically and legally, to retroactively revoke a promise that's already been made to current public servants.
Okay, let's trace this political pressure. It even started under the Obama administration, right?
It did. Back in 2015, President Barack Obama's budget proposed a cap on PSLF. The idea was to limit the amount of loan forgiveness to $57,500 for all new borrowers. This signaled a very early concern over the long-term fiscal liability eligibility of the program.
Especially for those high-debt borrowers like doctors and lawyers.
Exactly, the ones who would receive disproportionately large amounts of forgiveness.
And that concern was then amplified significantly by Republicans in the subsequent years.
Absolutely. The 2016 Republican budget resolution proposed eliminating the PSLF program entirely for new student loan borrowers. And this theme continued very aggressively under the next administration.
President Trump's budget proposals.
Correct. President Donald Trump proposed eliminating PSLF in his 2018, 2019, and 2021 budget proposals. The consistent rationale for all of these measures was fiscal responsibility.
And there was also a significant legislative attempt, which showed how serious Congress was about curbing the benefit.
That was the Prosper Act. It was a Republican-proposed bill that would have eliminated PSLF, again, only for new borrowers starting July 1st, 2019. This legislation advanced, but was ultimately considered dead after Democrats regained control of the House of Representatives in 2019.
But the driving force was always the same.
Always. The impetus for all these proposals remains constant. The finding in a key GAO report that the cost of loan forgiveness had been severely underestimated. So anytime there's a major policy discussion about student debt, PSLF is placed squarely on the chopping block for future participants.
So we have bureaucratic errors leading to massive denials, and we have these continuous legislative threats aimed at curtailing the program. Now we have to turn to litigation. Specifically, the American Bar Association, the ABA case, which reveals this dangerous precedent of the government changing the eligibility goalposts mid-game.
This case is a perfect microcosm of the chaos that public servants were facing. Starting in December 2016, a really critical issue arose.
What happened?
Certain employees who had been told, sometimes for years, that their jobs were eligible by the servicers and by the Department of Education were later told, retroactively, that their employers no longer qualified.
Wait, they were told they were good, and then the government changed its mind.
That's exactly it. The Department of Education had quietly decided the specific types of employment, despite being for a qualifying employer like the ABA, are no longer PSLF eligible.
This created incredible legal jeopardy, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, people had committed years to public service based on official guidance.
They had. And so the ABA and 4 individual plaintiffs sued the Department of Education over this retroactive denial. Their core argument was that the department had substantially changed its policy on PSLF-eligible employers without following the proper legal procedure.
Which would require public notice.
Yes, which requires statutory public notice and comment periods. The ABA argued the department was just refusing to honor commitments that formed the entire basis of their careers.
How did the federal court in New York react to the Department of Education's defense?
The court's reaction was devastating to the department. On February 22, 2019, the federal district court found the Department of Education's actions to be arbitrary and capricious.
And that's a very specific legal term.
It's a highly technical and damaging legal finding. It means the agency acted without a rational basis. The court ruled that the department failed to acknowledge it had changed its previous guidance, failed to provide a reasoned analysis for the denial, and, most crucially, failed to take into account the serious reliance interests affected by public servants who had structured a decade of their careers around this specific benefit.
The court actually went so far as to classify the department's position on eligibility as nonsense. That's an unusually strong word choice for a judicial opinion.
It speaks volumes about the court's frustration. It shows the judicial system saw this administrative confusion as deeply harmful and just fundamentally unfair to the plaintiffs. The ruling vacated the department's denial letters and mandated reconsideration.
And that was a hugely significant ruling.
It was, because it laid the critical legal groundwork for other borrowers who were denied after receiving faulty governmental guidance to appeal their cases.
So what was the final resolution of this major litigation? Did the Department of Education fight it?
No, they chose not to appeal the ruling. They subsequently settled with the ABA, confirming that all full-time ABA employees are indeed employed in a public service job for a public service organization.
But there was a catch.
There was. And this is the critical caveat that defines the next political battle. The Education Department reserved the right to change the definition of a public service organization in new regulations in the future.
So they lost the battle but kept the power for the war.
Exactly. They acknowledged the court's finding of arbitrary action, but they did not surrender the future power of rulemaking.
And that brings us right up to the most recent and highly charged regulatory changes in 2025. This shows us exactly why that department reservation of future rulemaking power mattered so much.
Maybe does.
It allows an administration to use the regulatory definition of public service as a political tool.
Precisely. We are now talking about actions that directly leverage the definition of a qualifying employer to exclude certain organizations based on the political or social activities they conduct. On March 7, 2025, President Donald J. Trump issued Executive Order 14235.
And the title was Restoring Public Service Loan Forgiveness.
That was the title.
What was the primary directive of this executive order regarding PSLF?
The order directed the Secretary of Education to revise PSLF regulations to specifically exclude organizations engaging in activities deemed to have a substantial illegal purpose. The idea was to create a mechanism to strip PSLF eligibility from nonprofits whose work was deemed contrary to the administration's legal or political interpretations.
And the executive order cited several types of activities as potentially disqualifying, right?
Right. It did. The order explicitly cited activities such as aiding illegal immigration, terrorism, child trafficking, discrimination, and acts of civil disorder. As soon as the order was released, a lot of concerns arose regarding the ambiguous scope of substantial illegal purpose and the potential for disqualifying widely recognized legitimate nonprofit sectors.
The final rules implementing this directive were then finalized in late 2025. What specific areas were cited in those finalized regulations?
On October 30, 2025, the administration finalized the rules that expanded the Education Department's power to exclude organizations engaged in these substantial illegal purpose activities. And we are reporting directly on the text of the finalized rules here, which were specifically aimed at two highly political areas.
Which were?
For instance, the regulation used specific, highly charged terminology referring to certain medical care for transgender youth as chemical castration, which is quoted directly from the executive summary of the rule, and it also targeted organizations involved in aiding illegal immigration.
So an organization like a legal aid society that's dedicated to providing representation for asylum seekers, or a nonprofit hospital that provides medical care for transgender individuals. They could theoretically lose their PSLF qualifying status based on these new regulatory interpretations.
That is the clear implication. This move ties the definition of a qualifying employer directly to the political priorities and regulatory interpretation of the current administration. It establishes a precedent that, regardless of a nonprofit's 501c status or its charitable mission, its employees' eligibility for loan forgiveness can be terminated if the organization engages in activities the administration deems to have a substantial illegal purpose.
That's a dramatic shift.
It's a dramatic shift in the understanding of what constitutes public service.
It's important to clarify, though, that separate from these politically driven exclusions, the Department of Education was also working on administrative improvements aimed at just making the program function better.
That's absolutely right. It wasn't all political warfare. The DOE convened what are called negotiated rulemaking sessions in July of 2025, specifically to address all this ongoing administrative confusion.
Then what came out of those?
These sessions produced 15 significant consensus-based revisions. They were all aimed at simplifying the application and the eligibility tracking processes for PSLF regulations. And these are expected to be released later in 2025, separate from the finalized political exclusions.
So we see the program simultaneously being streamlined bureaucratically while being attacked and redefined politically.
It's a perfect summary of the situation.
This has been a whirlwind tour through a program that's defined by these deep structural contradictions. A brilliant promise that was ruined by bureaucratic failure, revived by executive action, and then immediately subjected to incredible political volatility.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's just synthesize the primary tension points we've uncovered.
I think the tension is rooted in the program's history of broken trust. PSLF is a program of immense promise, a true, powerful incentive for public service. But it was immediately fraught with historic denial and bureaucratic confusion, primarily caused by servicer error and governmental complexity around loan types.
Yet the 2021 temporary waiver proved that the promise could be kept. It proved the program could work as intended. The fact that $6.2 billion was canceled for 100,000 people demonstrates the capacity for large-scale relief when you remove those bureaucratic hurdles around loan type and payment plan.
But the complexity inherent in diligent tracking and certification remains incredibly high.
So what's the lesson?
The lesson is that success for anyone pursuing PSLF requires militant focus. You must obtain direct loans, you have to select one of the income-driven repayment plans, and you have to diligently and regularly certify your employment.
You can't just trust the servicer.
You cannot rely on your servicer's advice. You have to assume you are responsible for monitoring your own compliance.
Hmm.
But critically, you must do all of this while operating under the awareness of a constantly shifting regulatory environment.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who might be considering public service or is maybe currently working in the field? What's the major takeaway from that ABA case and the 2025 regulatory changes?
It means that you cannot rely on the permanence of the program rules, especially the definition of your employer. The history of PSLF is a history of rule changes, legislative threats, and governmental reservations of the right to change the definitions. The political definition of public service is proving to be as unstable as the bureaucratic administration of the loans themselves.
That leads perfectly to our final provocative thought for you to consider long after this deep dive ends.
Given the continuous legislative efforts, dating back to the Obama administration, and consistently advanced by Republicans, to cap PSLF eligibility or eliminate the amount of debt forgiven, and considering the Department of Education's demonstrated ability, upheld by the courts in their settlement with the ABA, to change the definition of a public service organization via new regulations.
The question is, what does this ongoing instability and the political weaponization of the qualifying employer definition mean for the long-term career planning and commitment of future public servants?
Right. If the promise of relief, the very foundation of a decade-long professional commitment, can be retroactively revoked or just redefined every few years, does that risk undermining the entire purpose of PSLF?
Does it dissuade highly indebted graduates from choosing those lower-paying, critical public roles, forcing the government to find new, likely more costly ways to incentivize service? It's a question that defines the ongoing debate over the cost and execution and the very future of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program.
It's something to keep in mind as you commit the next decade of your professional life to serving the public. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.